Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, today I rise in condemnation of the Trump administration's heartless, cruel, and inhumane policy of separating children from their parents when they seek asylum at our southern border. I do so as a son of refugees who fled their homeland and came to this country because they longed to be free. I do so as a Catholic, appalled by what's being done in the name of my Christian faith. I do so out of concern as the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that the cruelty being conducted in the name of the United States government may cause lasting damage to America's reputation in the world. I do so as a parent who knows there's no love more powerful, no love more universal than love for your child. And it is love that has driven these families to seek asylum in the United States. Seeking asylum is not a crime. It is a cry for mercy, an act of desperation. The trauma being inflicted on these children and the anguish being inflicted on these parents is a direct result of the Trump administration's decision to criminalize asylum seekers and persecute families fleeing for their very lives. President Trump is lying to the American people when he says that family separation is the law of the land. He is lying when he says Democrats put a law on the books mandating children be terrorized in this way. Under previous administrations' policies, families remained together while waiting for their asylum claims to proceed through our immigration courts. But this president has broken with the basic standards of decency that has guided past administrations, Republican and Democrat alike. Now, the criminalizing of asylum seekers is, in fact, a newly unveiled policy. Attorney General Jeff Sessions called it a, quote, zero-tolerance policy. I say it's a zero-humanity policy, a zero-compassion policy. This policy of persecuting families fleeing for their lives comes straight from the white nationalist fringe. It's been in the works for over a year, going all the way back to when Chief of Staff John Kelly was Secretary of Homeland Security. Back in March of 2017, then Secretary John Kelly said that, quote, the name of the game is deterrence, unquote. He said that if the administration began separating kids from their parents, they could deter migrants from traveling to our southern border. And we have since heard Attorney General Jeff Sessions double down on the theme of deterrence. He said, quote, if people don't want to be separated from their children, they should not bring them with them. If you bring children, you'll be prosecuted. To those who spout this perverse notion of deterrence, I ask this question. How do you deter a mother trying to protect her child from the brutality of forced servitude? How do you deter a father trying to protect his daughter from being raped and tortured? How do you deter a family so fearful for their safety that they are willing to embark on a perilous journey and travel thousands of miles to reach the United States? The answer is that you can't, not without addressing the root causes of this forced migration. Most of these families come from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, these countries, three countries collectively known as the Northern Triangle. It's a region plagued by transnational gang violence, weak institutions, and poverty. Young boys are forced into servitude by gangs. Young girls are beaten and raped. Any parent who resists is killed. These countries suffer from some of the highest homicide rates in the world, and the violence against women is particularly appalling. In El Salvador, a woman is murdered every 19 hours. And in Honduras, the country with the highest homicide rate for women in the world, a woman is killed every 16 hours. To be blunt, these families face a stark choice. It's either stay and die or flee for a chance to live. The facts show this policy of deterrence isn't deterring anyone. That's because it's hard to deter people who are fleeing for their lives. In recent months, we've seen the number of people seeking safety and refuge rise. There were 36,682 apprehensions at the border back in February. By April, that number jumped to 50,924. In May, the number rose again to nearly 52,000. If we aim to reduce forced migration, we must improve the conditions in the region. Our only hope at doing so is by working with the governments of the Northern Triangle, by exercising smart diplomacy, by working together to follow solutions that promote the rule of law, provide public safety, and free communities of terror of transnational gang violence. And yet, just a few hours ago, President Trump threatened to cut off aid to Central America and Mexico because, quote, they are not sending their best. They are not sending their best. In other words, he would have the policy of the United States be to make the dire conditions in Central America even worse, driving even more families to flee their homes in search of asylum. Let's be clear. These individuals are fleeing of their own accord. They're not being sent. They're fleeing. Their choice is stark. Stay and die or live and have a shot to leave and have a shot to live. We know that USAID initiatives that support economic development and good governance make a real difference. We've heard directly from young people who found hope and safety through these programs. Now is not the time to recklessly abandon these programs. It's the time to invest in them. The administration claims to be for law and order, but it deals in chaos and discord. President Trump lies with such frequency and such confidence because he knows that the muddier the waters, the harder it is for the rays of truth to shine through. Well, this past weekend, some rays of life shined through when former First Lady Laura Bush made her voice heard. As she wrote in the Washington Post, our government, this is her quote, our government should not be in the business of warehousing children in converted box stores or making plans to place them in tent cities in the desert outside of El Paso. These images are eerily reminiscent of the internment camps for U.S. citizens and non-citizens of Japanese descent during World War II, now considered to have been one of the most shameful episodes in U.S. history. She couldn't be more right. This isn't a PR crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis, and it's a moral crisis for our country. That's why even members of the Trump administration are struggling to defend this policy. It's indefensible. It's indefensible. Years from now, we will look back on this policy, and will we be proud? No. We're going to look back and see it for what it is. Another dark period in our history in which we as a country failed to live up to the values that make America a beacon of hope and a leader among nations. It's despicable to see President Trump inflict trauma on innocent children just to score political points with his base, or to somehow use children as a leverage.
Order, please.
As a leverage for some negotiating point. That's what's happening here. President Trump and his Republican enablers in Congress have one strategy left in their playbook for 2018: They cannot run on being fiscally responsible. Their trillion-dollar corporate tax cuts have exploded the federal deficit. They cannot run on delivering the American people more affordable health because under their watch, health care premiums are soaring and prescription drug costs are surging. They cannot run on raising wages because under their policies, most of the nation's economic gains continue to go to big corporations and to the top 1% instead of working families in the middle class. So the only thing they have left to run on is fear. Fear. In 2018, the Republican Party has one message, and it's a message that says, as the president said earlier today, that these migrants aim to, quote, infest our country. Babies and toddlers and middle schoolers, they pose a threat to our public safety and our national security. Latino families who flee unthinkable violence are nothing more than pests. Let me be clear, Mr. President. Running to save the lives of your child doesn't make you a criminal. It makes you a parent. And tearing innocent children away from their parents is shameful, it is cruel, and it is un-American. Now President Trump is calling on Congress to fix a policy of his own creation. There's no law that instigates the president and his administration to do this, none at all. He chooses to do it. And House Republicans are trying to pass a so-called immigration compromise when, as far as I can see, the only thing it compromises is our time-tested system of legal, family-based immigration in this country. Contrary to Speaker Ryan's claims, this will do nothing to end the separation of families at the border. It doesn't address the issue of the president's zero-tolerance policy or put an end to the administration's cruel practices. Instead, the bill removes protections for asylum seekers and gives the administration license to lock families into detention for indefinite periods of time. President Trump and ideologues like Jeff Sessions and Stephen Miller want to use the tears of innocent children as leverage in their quest to end legal immigration as we know it, and to force the American people to pay for a ludicrous $25 billion border wall. The President, the Attorney General, the DHS Secretary, the White House Chief of Staff are practicing a double-speak tactic in the hope of confusing the American public. But there is nothing confusing about separating children from their parents. The America I know doesn't put children into cages. The America I know doesn't rip newborn babies out of their mother's arms. The America I know doesn't treat families fleeing from criminals like they are criminals. President Trump could end this despicable policy today without a law. He can order U.S. Customs and Border Patrol to stop tearing babies from their mother's arms today. He can correct course and restore America's commitment to basic human rights today. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But the audio released yesterday by ProPublica is worth 1,000,000 tears. How do you submit the cries of innocent children to the congressional record? I don't know how you do that, but you can hear it. You can hear it. I know we don't want to hear it. I know we don't want to hear it. But those are the cries of innocent children. I can't replicate it. I can't replicate their pain. Papi, papi, ¿dónde estás, papi? It's time that this Senate have its conscience pricked that it moves to action, and that it challenges the President on this horrific policy. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, first let me thank the senior senator from New Jersey for those remarks. It was a privilege and a pleasure to be here to hear them delivered. We had a hearing in the Judiciary Committee this morning with a representative of Homeland Security who was virtually incapable of explaining any of what they were trying to do here. And I think we now have 5 or 6 different explanations from the Trump administration.